There's a quiet truth I want you to feel right now. Most of your life has been shaped not by the battles you fought, but by the way you carried them in silence. The way you smiled while breaking inside. The way you stayed strong, even when your strength came at the cost of your softness. And maybe no one ever told you this, but that very softness, the one you've hidden, the one you've mistaken for weakness, is the most magnetic force you carry. It is the feminine polarity that can turn even struggle into something sacred. Think of all the times you felt you had to harden yourself, when you bit your tongue instead of speaking your truth, when you gave everything to someone who didn't know how to hold you, when you stayed because leaving felt like failure, even though your heart was quietly shattering. These are not just wounds. They are the training grounds of your power. And yet this power is not born in resistance. It awakens when you begin to lean into what you were taught to fear. The art of surrender, the beauty of receiving, the strength that lives in gentleness. Carl Jung once said that the feminine is the mystery that draws everything toward itself, not through force, but through the gravity of its being. And if you've ever wondered why you attract the unavailable, why you chase what leaves you empty, or why love sometimes feels like punishment, it is not because you are broken. It is because somewhere along the way, you confused survival with love. You believed you had to fight to earn it. But what if the very thing you thought disqualified you, your tenderness, your tears, your quiet longing, was the doorway to the kind of love that never needs to be chased? Take a breath. Let that settle. This isn't about pretending you don't hurt. It isn't about denying the heaviness in your chest, or the nights you've cried alone in a room that no one else sees. It's about letting those wounds stop being shameful secrets and start becoming the symbols of your aliveness. Because the truth is, the feminine doesn't turn pain into poison. She turns it into seduction, not of another person, but of life itself. She lets the ache in her chest become music, the breaking of her heart become a song that draws others closer instead of pushing them away. And if you are listening right now, maybe this is exactly what you needed to remember. You don't have to fight so hard. You don't have to prove yourself worthy. Your softness is already enough. Your vulnerability is already magnetic. And the moment you stop trying to be perfect, the moment you dare to be felt, is the moment you step into the power you've been searching for all along. If these words are touching something inside you, stay with me, because together we are going to walk deeper into this story. The story of how your feminine polarity can turn even the heaviest struggle into a dance, into a quiet kind of seduction that heals not only you, but everyone who touches your life. And if you feel seen right now, if this resonates with the places inside you that you usually keep hidden, I invite you to subscribe and join me here, not because you should, but because this space will keep reminding you of what the world often makes you forget, that your softness is your strength, your wounds are your wisdom, and your heart is not too much. There is a moment in every woman's life, and in every man who dares to embrace the feminine within him, where the mirror feels almost unbearable to face, not because of wrinkles or scars or any mark of time, but because of the weight in the eyes staring back, that heavy gaze of someone who has been surviving for far too long, who has given and given until the well ran dry. And yet, even in that exhaustion, there is a strange, magnetic beauty, because what is unbroken never truly shines. It is the cracks, the places where the light enters, that make a soul unforgettable. You may not realize it yet, but the struggles you've endured, the betrayals, the heartbreaks, the nights you felt abandoned by the very people you trusted most have been weaving themselves into something sacred. Your wounds are not blemishes on your worth. They are gateways. Every time you swallowed your voice to keep the peace, every time you overextended yourself just to be loved, every time you mistook chaos for passion, your heart was quietly storing a wisdom that only suffering can teach. And now, whether you know it or not, that wisdom is aching to be released. Here's the paradox. The more you harden, the more life slips through your fingers. But the more you soften, even if it terrifies you, the more life rushes in. Think about it. Have you ever been around someone who radiated such ease, such warmth, that you found yourself wanting to linger in their presence? That isn't charm. It isn't performance. It is the energy of someone who has stopped fighting and started allowing. The feminine polarity is not about controlling the world. It is about seducing it, drawing it in through openness, through the kind of vulnerability that feels like truth instead of weakness. Of course, there's a voice inside you that resists this. It says, if I soften, I'll get hurt again. If I let go, I'll lose everything I've worked for. If I stop proving myself, no one will stay. That voice comes from the child inside you who learned that love was something fragile, something conditional, something that could be taken away the moment you stopped trying. And so, you built armor. You carried yourself with strength so no one could see the trembling underneath. But the irony is, That armor doesn't protect you, it keeps you starving for the intimacy you secretly crave. What if you let yourself put it down, even just a little? What if, instead of fighting to be enough, you began to let yourself be seen as you are messy, tender, imperfect, radiant in ways no perfection could ever capture? This is where the shift happens. The moment you stop running from your softness and begin to reclaim it, struggle begins to transform. Instead of chasing love, you begin to attract it. Instead of fighting for space, you begin to occupy it without asking permission. Instead of losing yourself in relationships, you begin to invite others into the depth of your presence. The truth is, the feminine does not need to win. She doesn't need to conquer. Her power lies in her ability to receive, to magnetize, to make space so irresistible that everything meant for her cannot help but arrive. And in that space, even your pain becomes alluring, because it is no longer something to hide, but something that sings. Your heartbreak becomes art. Your longing becomes gravity. Your softness becomes the very thing that pulls life closer to you. So if you are tired of chasing, if you are weary from fighting, if you feel the ache of giving too much without being held in return, stay here, because what you long for is not gone. It is waiting for you in the very place you've been taught to fear. It is waiting in your surrender, and once you taste it, once you allow yourself to soften into it, you will never see your struggles the same way again. There is something I need to tell you that no one dared whisper when you were younger. You were never meant to carry the whole weight of love on your shoulders. Somewhere along the way, you became the caretaker, the healer, the one who absorbed the storms so that others could breathe in calm skies. You believed that if you gave enough, proved enough, endured enough, then maybe, finally, someone would stay. And yet, isn't it strange how the more you gave, the more they slipped away? Not because you weren't worthy, but because in the act of trying to hold everything together, you forgot to let yourself be held. This is the tragedy and the beauty of the feminine struggle. The tragedy is that she has been conditioned to confuse sacrifice with intimacy. The beauty is that the moment she remembers her true polarity, everything begins to shift. Because the feminine does not seduce through effort, through overextending, through desperate grasping. She seduces through being, through the quiet radiance of presence, through the subtle invitation that says, I am here, open, alive. Come closer if you dare. Think back to the last time you felt truly seen. Not for what you could do, not for how much you could give, but for who you were when you weren't performing. Maybe it was in the eyes of a stranger who noticed your laughter. Maybe it was in the arms of someone who held you without demanding you fix yourself first. Or maybe it was in those rare, fleeting moments when you caught your own reflection and saw, for just a second, the softness you've been hiding. That is the essence of the feminine polarity, the ability to awaken desire not by chasing, but by revealing. But here is where the wound often lies deepest. Many of us learned early that to reveal ourselves was dangerous. To cry was to be called too much. To express longing was to be shamed. To lean on another was to risk disappointment. And so, we hardened. We became self-sufficient, powerful, unstoppable. And the world clapped for us, didn't it? They praised our independence, our strength, our ability to endure. But late at night, when no one was watching, the applause felt empty, because what your soul craved was not to be admired for how much you could hold, but to be cherished for how deeply you could feel. This is why struggle can become seduction. Not the kind of seduction that manipulates, but the kind that draws life toward you simply because you dare to live without the mask. Imagine being able to say, yes, I have been hurt. Yes, I have scars. Yes, I still long for love anyway. Do you see how irresistible that is? Because vulnerability is not weakness, it is the most powerful form of truth. And when you embody it, people cannot help but lean closer. So tonight, if you are listening with a tired heart, if you are carrying the weight of a love that disappointed you, or the ache of never being chosen, I want you to know something. You are already enough. Your softness is not a liability, it is your magnetism. Your longing is not a curse, it is your compass. And the very pain you've tried to hide is what will one day make someone fall to their knees in awe of how deeply you can love. Stay with me here, because we are just beginning to uncover how this transformation unfolds, how the feminine polarity not only turns wounds into wisdom, but teaches you how to stop running, how to stop fighting, how to finally rest in the arms of your own radiance. There is a softness in you that terrifies the part of you that has survived on armor. You know, the one, the part that keeps score, that measures worth by how little you need, that smiles while breaking inside because vulnerability once felt like a dangerous place. But let me tell you something your bones already know. Armor may keep you safe, but it also keeps you untouched. And untouched, your soul cannot bloom. You see, struggle becomes seductive when you stop hiding it. Not when you broadcast your pain as proof of survival, But when you let it live openly, unashamed, like a scar that glimmers instead of one you conceal. Think of it this way. People are not drawn to perfection. Perfection is cold. It intimidates. It builds walls. What draws us in is the humanity of someone who dares to feel, who allows themselves to be moved, who doesn't flinch at the thought of being seen raw. That is what creates closeness. That is what makes you unforgettable. And yet, you've been told the opposite, haven't you? You've been told that to be desirable, you must always be composed, always pleasing, always enough but never too much. You learn to silence your needs, to swallow your truth, to confuse giving with worthiness. That is why so many of your relationships felt like running in circles. You kept offering pieces of yourself to people who never truly had the capacity to hold you, not because you weren't radiant, but because you kept mistaking struggle for love, instead of letting struggle become the spark that sets you free. Imagine this. Instead of trying to win someone's attention, you sit in the fullness of who you are. You don't chase, you don't perform, you don't shrink. You soften, you breathe, you let your presence do the speaking. That is the feminine polarity. It does not beg, it does not bargain. It simply allows, and in allowing it becomes magnetic. And isn't that what you've secretly longed for? To stop exhausting yourself for crumbs and finally feel like love is flowing toward you effortlessly, not because you earned it, but because you finally dared to receive it. This is why the wounds matter. They are not accidents. They are teachers. Every heartbreak has been asking you the same question. Will you keep hardening? Or will you let this pain open you deeper? It is easier to shut down, of course. Easier to close the door and promise yourself you'll never need anyone again. But the danger of closing is that you also close yourself off from the very intimacy you crave. The paradox is simple. The more you resist your pain, the longer it lingers. The more you allow it, the more it becomes your invitation, your quiet seduction of life itself. So let yourself tremble. Let yourself ache. Let yourself want. You do not have to apologize for longing. Longing is proof that your heart is alive, that you haven't numbed yourself into stone. And when you stop apologizing for it, when you allow others to see the rawness in your eyes, you will feel the shift. People will lean closer, not away. Life will meet you, not resist you, because nothing is more magnetic than a soul unafraid to be real. Stay with me, because where we are going next will touch the deepest part of you, the place where pain doesn't just soften into beauty, but becomes the very fire that makes you unforgettable. There is a sacred kind of beauty in the moment you stop pretending you are fine. When the mask slips, when the smile falters, when the carefully polished version of you finally shatters, something honest begins to rise. And though you've spent years fearing that truth, fearing rejection, abandonment, judgment, it is in that very breaking that your real power reveals itself. Because the world doesn't fall in love with your perfection. It falls in love with your humanity. Think about the people you've been most drawn to in your life. Was it the ones who always had it together, who never faltered, who carried themselves like glass that couldn't crack? Or was it the ones who let you glimpse their trembling, their softness, their courage to be undone and still keep loving anyway? There is something magnetic about someone who doesn't hide their scars. They remind us we are not alone. They give us permission to breathe. They teach us that struggle is not shame, it is intimacy in disguise. This is the feminine polarity, the strength that lies not in force, but in surrender. The seduction that happens not through control, but through openness. And yet so many of us have been trained to believe the opposite. We've been told that the world only respects hardness, that love must be earned through effort, that showing need is weakness. And so we armor up, we run faster, we give more. We silence the voice inside that whispers, I just want to be held. But listen closely, your longing is not weakness. Your longing is the language of your soul, the compass that points you back to yourself. When you try to suppress it, you only deepen the ache. But when you allow it, when you let it breathe without shame, something begins to change. Instead of chasing what slips away, you begin to attract what is meant to stay. Instead of struggling to be chosen, you embody the truth that you already are. And this shift, this surrender, turns your deepest struggles into the most irresistible part of you. Yes, people will come who cannot hold this depth. People will come who only know how to take. That has always been true. But the difference now is that you no longer confuse their inability with your unworthiness. You begin to see clearly. They leave not because I am too much, but because they are not ready for this much truth. And in that recognition, the old cycle breaks. You no longer need to bend yourself smaller to keep them. You no longer need to prove your value by giving until you disappear. Instead, you lean back into your softness, into your quiet magnetism, and you let life flow toward you. This is how struggle becomes seduction. When you stop resisting your own heart, when you stop apologizing for your own depth, the very things you once tried to hide become the things that make you unforgettable. Your tears become poetry. Your silence becomes gravity. Your scars become the proof that love has touched you, and that you are brave enough to let it touch you again. So if you are weary from holding everything together, hear me now. You do not need to keep fighting. You do not need to keep proving. You do not need to keep hiding. You are most magnetic, most radiant, most alive when you dare to be seen in your softness. And the world is waiting not for your perfection, but for your truth. There is a quiet revolution that begins the moment you stop confusing hardness with strength. For so long, you've been told that to survive, you must endure without breaking. That to be worthy, you must give without asking. That to be loved, you must be unshakable. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if the real strength lies in the breaking? What if the feminine power has never been about holding everything together, but about allowing everything to move through her grief, joy, longing, desire without shame? Close your eyes for a moment and remember the last time you let yourself cry without rushing to stop. That trembling release, that surrender, it felt dangerous, but it also felt holy, didn't it? That is the essence of feminine polarity. Not holding the world at arm's length, but pulling it close, letting it touch you, letting it move you. And in doing so, you become irresistible. Not because you are flawless, but because you are alive. This is why struggle becomes seduction. When you no longer run from your pain, when you let it breathe and let others see it, your presence deepens. People lean in because they sense truth in you. They feel your openness as an invitation, your vulnerability as a kind of courage they didn't know they were allowed to have. And suddenly, instead of being the one who chases, you are the one who draws. Instead of fighting for love, you are the one who magnetizes it. But I know it is terrifying to soften. To soften feels like stepping into the fire. Your mind screams, if I stop controlling, everything will fall apart. If I let them see me, they will leave. If I show my longing, they will turn away. These are the old voices, the survival patterns that were born the first time your tenderness was met with rejection. They built your armor. They taught you to hide. But the very thing you fear, that your softness will drive people away, is the thing that, in truth, will bring the right ones closer. When Jung spoke of the feminine, he described her as the mystery that cannot be solved, only experienced. She is not the pursuit, she is the gravity. And gravity does not chase. Gravity does not beg. Gravity simply is, and everything meant for it cannot resist but come closer. That is your power. Not in running, not in proving, but in being. So let yourself be touched by your own story. Let your struggles become the doorway instead of the prison. Let your heartbreak become the proof of how deeply you love. And trust that the softness you've been taught to fear is the very thing that will set you free. Because the truth is this: your beauty is not in how perfectly you can hold it together, but in how bravely you can fall apart and still choose to open again. That is the seduction. That is the power. That is the feminine. There is a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when the shift happens. You stop asking, why was I not enough for them? And you start wondering, why did I believe I had to beg for love in the first place? That single question opens a door that can never be closed again. Because the truth begins to whisper to you, it was never about being enough. It was about forgetting that you already were. Your struggles, those late nights you stayed awake replaying the same conversations, those mornings you rose heavy with the ache of rejection, those days you wore a smile while collapsing inside, have always been leading you back here. Back to the center of yourself. Back to the place where you no longer confuse endurance with intimacy. Back to the knowing that your softness is not what pushed them away, it is what will draw the right ones in. Do you feel that? That small loosening in your chest when you realize you don't have to keep performing. That relief that washes over you when you remember you don't have to be the strong one all the time. That's the beginning of freedom. The feminine polarity is not a performance. It is not a mask. It is a return. A return to the way you were before the world told you to harden. A return to the child who wanted to be loved simply for existing. A return to the truth that you never needed to earn what was already yours. This is where seduction transforms into something sacred. Not the seduction of trickery or manipulation, but the seduction of authenticity. When you sit in your longing without apology, when you breathe into your own wounds without shame, when you dare to be seen as you are, people feel it. They feel your presence like a pull. They feel your honesty like a mirror. They feel your aliveness like a fire they didn't know they were missing. And suddenly, you are not the one chasing, you are the one being sought. But let me be honest, this path is not without fear. There will be moments when opening feels unbearable, when every instinct tells you to shut down, to hide, to protect yourself from disappointment. And in those moments, you will be asked to make a choice. Do you cling to the armor that has kept you lonely? Or do you risk letting someone touch the places you swore you'd never expose again? This is where courage lives, not in pretending you're unaffected, but in daring to stay soft when every wound begs you to harden. And here lies the paradox. The very thing you fear, your tenderness, your tears, your desire to be held, is the very thing that makes you magnetic. People are not drawn to the walls you build. They are drawn to the warmth that radiates when those walls come down. They are drawn to the quiet strength that lives in your softness. They are drawn to the honesty in your longing. This is how struggle becomes seduction. This is how pain becomes power. So let yourself breathe here. Let yourself rest. You don't need to chase anymore. You don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to carry the weight of proving yourself. You are already the magnet. You are already the gravity. You are already the one they cannot help but move toward when you dare to stop hiding. There is a fire that comes alive when you stop apologizing for how much you feel. For years you've been told to tone it down, to be easier, quieter, less demanding. You've been told that your tears make you weak, that your longing makes you needy, that your desire to be held makes you too much. And so, you tucked your heart behind walls, thinking that maybe if you made yourself smaller, safer, less complicated, you'd finally be chosen. But here's the truth. You were never meant to be chosen for being less. You were meant to be cherished for being more. The feminine polarity is not about shrinking into silence. It is about expanding into truth. It is about letting your softness be felt, your ache be seen, your tenderness be honored instead of hidden. Because when you allow yourself to feel without shame, you awaken something that cannot be faked. You awaken a presence so magnetic, so alive, that it calls life closer without a word. Think about it. When has anyone ever truly moved you? Was it when they pretended they were fine, when they held back their truth, when they armored themselves to appear invincible? Or was it when they let themselves be raw, when their voice trembled, when their eyes filled with tears, when they confessed the very thing they were terrified to say out loud? That is the moment hearts connect. That is the moment intimacy is born. And that is the essence of your power. Your struggles have not been punishment. They have been preparation. Every heartbreak taught you what you will no longer settle for. Every betrayal showed you the difference between empty promises and real presence. Every night you cried alone deepened your capacity to hold compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. And now, those struggles have shaped you into someone who does not need to perform to be loved, only to allow. But allowing is the hardest part, isn't it? Because allowing means surrender. It means releasing the illusion of control. It means trusting that what is meant for you will stay without you chasing it. It means opening yourself to the possibility of being hurt again, and yet choosing to risk it anyway. That is the feminine paradox, the strength to remain soft even when you have every reason to close. And that is why she is irresistible, because nothing is more alluring than a heart that refuses to go numb. So what happens when you lean into this truth? Your energy shifts. You stop gripping. You stop running. You stop exhausting yourself trying to be chosen. Instead, you begin to radiate. And when you radiate, life cannot help but respond. People are drawn to you without knowing why. Opportunities find you. Love moves toward you. Because you've stopped chasing and started receiving. You've stopped fighting and started allowing. And maybe, as you hear these words, a part of you feels the stirring of recognition. A part of you knows that you are tired of the chase, tired of the struggle, tired of wearing armor that was never meant to be yours. And maybe you're ready to step into the kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't force, doesn't beg. The kind of power that whispers, that breathes, that seduces simply by existing. That power is already within you. It has always been there, waiting for the moment you'd be brave enough to remember. There comes a point when the exhaustion of pretending finally outweighs the fear of being seen. You wake up one morning and realize you can't keep performing strength while your heart aches for softness. You can't keep offering love like a bargain while starving for it yourself. You can't keep running toward people who only know how to take. And so, quietly, you begin to choose something different. Not louder, not harder, but softer. This is where the real transformation begins. Because the feminine polarity is not about fighting to be loved, it is about remembering that you already are. It is about leaning back into your own gravity, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't chase, doesn't beg. Gravity simply exists, and everything meant for it eventually finds its way home. But the shift is subtle. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with small choices. You start saying no when your body feels heavy with yeses you don't mean. You start resting instead of rushing. You start allowing silence to speak for you, instead of filling every space with effort. And in those choices, something miraculous happens. Your struggle softens into presence, and that presence becomes magnetic. People begin to notice. They lean in without understanding why. They feel safer around you, not because you've bent yourself into their expectations, but because you radiate authenticity. They can feel your depth, your softness, your willingness to be moved. And that willingness is rare. It is irresistible, because in a world full of masks, the feminine who dares to be real becomes unforgettable. Yes, there will still be people who cannot hold your depth. There will still be those who leave, those who take, those who fail to recognize the gift of your presence. But here is the difference. Their leaving will no longer shatter you, because you no longer confuse their inability to stay with your worth. You understand now it was never about being too much. It was about being more than they were ready to receive, and that realization is liberation. It frees you from the endless cycle of chasing and proving. It frees you from mistaking struggle for intimacy. It frees you to rest in yourself, to let love come to you instead of exhausting yourself trying to catch it. This is why your struggles have never been wasted. They were carving you open, teaching you the difference between the love that depletes and the love that nourishes, guiding you back to the truth that your softness is your power, that your wounds are not a curse, but an initiation, that your longing is not shameful, but sacred. And maybe right now, as you listen, a part of you is breathing easier, because you realize you don't have to keep fighting. You don't have to keep giving until you disappear. You don't have to keep apologizing for needing love. You can let go. You can soften. You can allow life to come closer, not because you've earned it, but because you finally dare to receive it. And in that receiving, everything changes. There is a moment when the world feels different, not because it has changed, but because you have. The same streets, the same rooms, the same faces, but suddenly, you are no longer searching for something outside yourself to complete you. You feel it, a quiet warmth in your chest, a stillness that doesn't demand, a sense that you don't have to run anymore. That is the moment when struggle finally turns into seduction, not seduction of another, but of life itself. Life leans toward those who are alive, and aliveness is not about being perfect, untouchable, or endlessly strong. Aliveness is about being porous, letting love in, letting grief move through, letting joy surprise you, letting longing ache without shame. It is about living with your heart unarmored, even when the world has given you 1,000 reasons to protect it. And that, my love, is why the feminine is irresistible. Not because she chases, not because she conquers, but because she is willing to feel it all. Think of it. The moments that changed you most were not the ones where you pretended to be fine, but the ones where you allowed yourself to break. The night you cried so deeply it felt like your body was made of salt water. The morning you finally admitted to yourself, I can't keep living like this. The quiet afternoon when you whispered a prayer, not for someone else to save you, but for the strength to stop abandoning yourself. Those moments were holy. They cracked you open. They made space for something new to grow. And this is the secret. The feminine polarity is not about avoiding struggle, but about alchemizing it. Pain becomes depth. Longing becomes magnetism. Vulnerability becomes gravity. Every wound you've carried becomes the very place where light shines through. And when you dare to live from that place, people can feel it. They can feel that you are not hiding, not hardening, not bargaining. They can feel your presence like warmth on their skin. And that warmth is irresistible. Of course, this doesn't mean you will never be hurt again. It doesn't mean everyone who comes into your life will stay. But it does mean that you will never again mistake someone else's inability to hold you as evidence that you are unworthy of being held. You will never again confuse struggle with intimacy. You will never again apologize for the depth of your longing. Because now you know, what makes you magnetic is not your perfection, but your truth. So here you are, at the threshold of a new way of being. A way where you no longer chase love but let it find you. Where you no longer harden to survive but soften to thrive. Where you no longer see your struggles as proof of weakness, but as the very texture of your beauty. This is the feminine polarity that Jung spoke of, the mystery that does not conquer but attracts, that does not fight but surrenders, that turns even heartbreak into poetry. And maybe right now, you can feel it stirring inside you, the quiet knowing that you don't have to keep running, that everything you've been searching for is already leaning toward you, waiting for the moment you stop hiding and dare to be seen. And so the softest revolution begins, not with a loud declaration, not with another battle to win, but with a single choice: to let yourself be seen as you are, to let the walls slip, to let your eyes tell the truth of your longing, to let your voice tremble instead of holding it back. This is where struggle dissolves into something else, something almost unexplainable. This is where the weight you've been carrying becomes a doorway instead of a burden, because the world doesn't fall in love with the one who never stumbles. It falls in love with the one who dares to rise again and again, each time softer, more open, more alive. Your heartbreaks, your disappointments, your silent nights of loneliness, they are not evidence that you are unworthy. They are evidence that your heart refuses to close, that it still chooses love even when it knows the cost. And that choice, again and again, is what makes you luminous. There is something undeniably seductive about a soul that refuses to go numb. You've seen it before, haven't you? Someone walks into a room and without saying a word, you feel them. Not because of how they look, not because of what they do, but because of the way they allow themselves to be present. They breathe fully. They meet your eyes. They aren't hiding. They aren't rushing to impress. They are simply there, alive in their own skin. That is what makes the feminine magnetic. She doesn't try to control the current of life. She lets it flow through her, and in doing so, she becomes the current itself. But let's be honest, this takes courage. It is easier to armor yourself, to keep people at a safe distance, to hide behind the polished version of yourself. It is easier to convince the world you are fine than to let someone see the cracks. And yet, every time you choose the armor, a piece of you feels a little less alive. Every time you hide your longing, it grows heavier in your chest. Every time you silence your truth, you lose a little more of yourself. So what happens if, just once, you choose differently? If you let someone see you cry instead of swallowing it down? If you say I need you without shame? If you stop pretending to be untouchable and instead allow yourself to be touched? Something begins to shift. The struggle that once felt like a curse begins to transform into an invitation. The very thing you thought disqualified you, your tenderness, your aching, your vulnerability, becomes the thing that draws others closer. This is why the feminine polarity turns struggle into seduction. Because when you stop resisting your own heart, when you stop apologizing for your depth, you become the kind of presence that can't be ignored. You stop chasing love because you are already radiating it. You stop begging for attention because your very being commands it without words. You stop fearing your softness because you finally understand it was never weakness. It was always the fire that makes you unforgettable. And here's the most important part. This isn't about finding someone to complete you. This is about remembering that you were always whole. Love doesn't arrive when you perfect yourself. It arrives when you let yourself be real. When you stop performing strength and start living your truth. When you stop silencing your longing and start letting it sing. Because in the end, the greatest seduction is not about pulling another into your orbit. It is about falling in love with your own aliveness, your own softness, your own heart that dares to beat even after it has been broken. That is what makes you magnetic. That is what makes life lean toward you. There is a softness you have been carrying all along, a softness you thought you had to bury just to survive. The world told you that if you wanted to be respected, you had to toughen up. That if you wanted to be loved, you had to earn it. That if you wanted to be safe, you had to silence the parts of you that trembled. And so, you learned to hold your breath in your own life. But the truth is, the breath you've been holding is the very thing that makes you magnetic once you finally let it go. When you release it, when you stop holding back your tears, your desires, your truth, something awakens in you. A presence that doesn't need to beg, doesn't need to demand, doesn't need to prove. A presence that is felt the moment you walk into a room. This is the feminine polarity. It doesn't win by chasing, it wins by receiving. It doesn't dominate by force, it moves through surrender. It doesn't seduce by pretending, it seduces by being. And maybe that scares you, because being means letting yourself be seen. It means allowing someone to notice the way your voice shakes when you speak your truth. It means letting them see the tears that roll down without apology. It means no longer hiding behind the armor that once protected you but now keeps you starving. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop hiding, you begin to attract. The moment you stop controlling, you begin to receive. The moment you stop resisting your longing, it begins to guide you home. Your struggles were never meant to make you hard. They were meant to make you deep. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every betrayal, they carved you open so that more light could pour through. And though it felt unbearable at times, each wound was preparing you to embody a power you could not have known otherwise. The power of being unashamedly alive. Have you noticed how the people who move you most are rarely the ones who look perfect? They are the ones who allow you to feel them. They laugh without polishing it. They cry without hiding it. They speak without rehearsing it. They are raw. And in their rawness, they are unforgettable. That is the seduction of authenticity. It is not calculated. It is not rehearsed. It is not performed. It is lived. And this is your invitation. To live. To let your pain become art. Your longing become gravity. your softness become your strength. To stop treating your struggles as evidence of your weakness, and instead see them as the very fabric of your beauty. Because when you embody this truth, you no longer chase love. You become it. You no longer fight for attention. You embody presence. You no longer fear your wounds. You honor them as the places where life touched you most deeply. And in that honoring, something sacred happens. Struggle no longer feels like a cage. It feels like a key. The key that unlocks you to yourself. The key that draws others closer. The key that reminds you that you were never broken, only becoming. There is something almost holy about the moment you realize you don't have to hold everything together anymore. For so long, you've carried the weight of relationships, of expectations, of proving that you were strong enough, worthy enough, unbreakable enough. And yet, in the quietest hours, you felt the ache of that lie. Because deep down, you were never meant to live in armor. You were meant to live in skin. Skin that feels. Skin that longs. Skin that trembles when touched. When you begin to trust that softness, everything changes. The world that once felt heavy begins to lean toward you. People who once overlooked you suddenly linger in your presence. Not because you've worked harder to earn their gaze, but because you've stopped trying at all. This is the paradox of the feminine polarity. The less you force, the more life flows to you. The less you control, the more love enters. The less you harden, the more magnetic you become. But this isn't about pretending. Pretending softness is just another mask. It's not about acting gentle while hiding your rage, or smiling while swallowing your grief. It's about letting the truth of who you are live at the surface. It's about saying, yes, I've been hurt, and I am still open. Yes, I have scars, and they are proof of how deeply I can love. Yes, I long. And that longing is not weakness, it is my compass. When you live from that place, your struggles don't diminish you, they adorn you. They make your presence undeniable, and I know you've been told otherwise. You've been told your emotions are too much, your tears are inconvenient, your needs are a burden. So you learn to silence them, to give without asking, to love without receiving. And yet, every time you did, a piece of you withered. That is why you feel the emptiness. That is why, no matter how much you give, it never feels like enough. Because it isn't your giving that makes you magnetic, it's your allowing. Imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to stop apologizing for your heart, to stop silencing your longing, to stop performing strength you no longer want to carry. Imagine walking into the world without asking, am I enough? And instead breathing into the truth, I am already enough, exactly as I am. That shift alone could change your life. Because when you stand in that truth, you no longer chase love, it chases you. This is not a fantasy. This is the natural state of your being, once you strip away the conditioning that taught you to fear yourself. The feminine polarity is not about adding something new to you, it's about remembering what you were before the world told you to harden. It's about returning home to yourself. And in that return, you will find that every struggle, every heartbreak, every wound was never wasted. It was guiding you here, where your softness is not a liability but your crown. Here, where your longing is not shameful but magnetic. Here, where your pain is not a curse but a story that only deepens your beauty. There is a tenderness that rises in you when you finally stop running from yourself. It feels almost unfamiliar at first, like meeting a stranger who has lived inside you all along. This stranger is not the fighter, not the one who held everything together, not the one who wore the smile while breaking inside. This stranger is your truest self, the self that feels without apology, the self that loves without calculation, the self that receives without shame. And when you let her take her place again, your life begins to soften into something you once thought impossible. Because the truth is, you were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to radiate it. You were never meant to prove your worth. You were meant to embody it. You were never meant to confuse struggle with intimacy. You were meant to let intimacy arrive through the very openness you feared. And this is what makes the feminine polarity so magnetic. She doesn't strive to be chosen, she remembers she already is. Think of it as the difference between grasping and allowing. Grasping says, I need you to stay so I can feel whole. Allowing says, I am whole, and you may join me if you can honor that wholeness. One is heavy, the other is irresistible. And yet, so many of us live in grasping, not because we are weak, but because we were trained to believe that love must be earned, that we must suffer for it, that we must prove ourselves worthy through sacrifice. But when you step into allowing, the entire story changes. Your struggles stop being evidence that you failed and start becoming proof that you have lived. Your heartbreak is no longer a mark of shame but a sign of your depth. Your longing is no longer an emptiness to fix, but an energy that pulls life closer. And suddenly, without effort, you find yourself surrounded by what once seemed impossible: connection that feels nourishing, love that feels safe, presence that feels like home. Still, this path is not without risk. Opening yourself, allowing yourself, means surrendering control. It means being willing to face disappointment. It means trusting that the right love will meet you in your openness, and that the wrong love will reveal itself by leaving. And though that leaving may hurt, you will know it is not your failure. It is your freedom, because you no longer need to contort yourself to be kept. You are no longer willing to trade your truth for temporary affection. And this is the quiet power of the feminine. She doesn't force. She doesn't plead. She doesn't bargain. She simply is. She feels fully. She loves deeply. She allows completely. And in that allowing, she becomes magnetic, not because she tries to be, but because she cannot help but be. So let your struggles soften into your presence. Let your scars shimmer instead of hide. Let your longing breathe instead of suffocate. Because what makes you unforgettable is not how perfectly you can endure, but how bravely you can open again and again. That is the seduction. That is the beauty. That is the power of being unafraid to be real. There is a kind of freedom that begins when you stop asking for permission to exist as you are. For years, you've bent yourself into shapes that were never meant for you. You silenced your truth because you feared it would scare them away. You dimmed your light because you thought it would be too much. You carried your pain quietly because you didn't want to burden anyone. And yet, none of it kept you safe, did it? None of it gave you the love you longed for. Instead, it left you empty, waiting for someone else to tell you that you were enough. But here is the shift. The moment you decide you no longer need their permission, you become untouchable. Not untouchable in the sense of being unreachable, but untouchable in your knowing. The feminine polarity, when she remembers herself, does not beg to be seen. She shines. She does not fight to be chosen. She rests in the truth that she already is. She does not harden to be respected. She softens, and in doing so, she becomes irresistible. And this is how struggle turns into seduction, not because the pain disappears, but because you begin to embody it differently. Instead of wearing your wounds as shame, you wear them as beauty. Instead of hiding your longing, you let it breathe. Instead of apologizing for your tears, you let them be seen as proof of your courage. And people feel it. They feel your depth. They feel your presence. They feel your refusal to hide anymore. And that presence alone is magnetic. Think of the most breathtaking art you've ever encountered. It wasn't perfect, was it? It was raw. It was broken in places. It carried the fingerprints of struggle. That is what made it unforgettable. That is what made you stop and stare. And so it is with you. You were never meant to be polished glass. You were meant to be living fire, messy, radiant, untamed, real. And yes, there will still be those who cannot stand in that fire. They will turn away, not because you are too much, but because they are not ready. But instead of chasing them, instead of begging them to stay, you will let them go. Because you know now, your worth does not leave when they do. Your light does not dim when they turn their backs. Your softness does not become weakness just because someone else could not hold it. And in that knowing, everything changes. You stop shrinking. You stop bargaining. You stop exhausting yourself for scraps of affection. Instead, you open. You soften. You allow. And the more you do, the more life leans toward you. Love flows. Opportunities appear. Connection deepens. Because the world cannot resist the pull of someone who dares to be fully alive. This is your power. This has always been your power. Not the power of control, but the power of surrender. Not the power of perfection, but the power of truth. Not the power of being chosen, but the power of remembering that you were never unchosen in the first place. And maybe now you can feel it, that subtle shift inside you. It's almost quiet, almost fragile, like the first breath after a long time underwater. A recognition that you don't have to keep carrying this weight alone. A whisper that says, it's safe to stop proving. It's safe to soften. It's safe to be seen. And for the first time in a long while, you realize that maybe, just maybe, your struggles weren't curses, they were doorways. Every heartbreak that left you hollow was teaching you that love is not something you must beg for. Every disappointment was carving space in you, space that could hold something truer, deeper, more aligned. Every time you silenced yourself to keep the peace, your soul was quietly taking notes, waiting for the day you'd say, no more. And that day is here. Because this is where the feminine polarity becomes something more than theory, it becomes your lived reality. It's the way you breathe a little slower now, trusting that what is meant for you will come. It's the way you look someone in the eyes without fear of what they'll see. It's the way you let your laughter come from deep in your belly, unpolished, uncontained. It's the way you let your tears roll freely without rushing to hide them. That is magnetic. That is irresistible. That is the kind of presence that cannot be ignored. And notice how this doesn't take effort. Effort was the old way, grasping, striving, begging to be seen. The new way is about allowing. Allowing love to arrive without force. Allowing connection to deepen without performance. Allowing your truth to be spoken even if your voice shakes. Allowing your body to soften into its natural rhythm instead of pushing past its limits. Allowing your life to unfold without trying to control every outcome. Yes, people may not understand at first. Some may say you've changed. Some may drift away. But this time, you won't take their leaving as a wound. You'll see it for what it is, a clearing, a making of space. Because only those who can meet you in your truth will remain. Only those who can honor your softness will stay. Only those who are drawn not to the mask but to the real, raw, alive heart beating in your chest will come closer. And in that space, everything you thought you lost begins to return only now. It comes without struggle. Love comes as ease. Connection comes as presence. Life comes as flow, because you are no longer chasing. You are no longer fighting. You are no longer exhausting yourself to be enough. You are simply being, and in being, you are more than enough. This is the moment when struggle becomes seduction. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally dared to let go. Because you finally trusted that your softness is not your downfall, it is your crown. There is something profoundly beautiful that happens when you stop running from your own reflection. For so long, you may have looked in the mirror and seen only the weight of your struggles, the exhaustion in your eyes, the tightness in your jaw, the heaviness that no amount of smiling could disguise. But one day, you look again, and you see something different. Not perfection, not flawlessness, but truth. And in that truth, there is a glow. That glow doesn't come from finally getting everything you wanted. It comes from finally allowing yourself to stop hiding. It comes from realizing that your softness is not weakness, but strength. It comes from trusting that your wounds are not shameful, they are sacred. And suddenly, instead of avoiding your own gaze, you linger. You see the woman, or the man, who has walked through fire and still chooses to love. You see the soul who has been broken and rebuilt 1,000 times, softer each time, never bitter, never numb. That is beauty. That is magnetism. This is why the feminine polarity is so powerful. It doesn't demand attention, it draws it. Not through force, but through presence. Not through chasing, but through radiating. And the more you surrender to this truth, the more you notice the shift. You no longer feel the need to over-explain, to overgive, to overcompensate. You simply breathe. You simply stand. You simply exist in your fullness. And somehow, that alone is enough. Your struggles begin to transform here. They no longer feel like heavy chains pulling you down. They begin to feel like threads woven into the fabric of who you are, giving your soul texture, depth, richness. Because it is not the easy moments that make you unforgettable, it is the moments you thought you wouldn't survive but did. It is the moments you felt shattered, and yet your heart still whispered, "Open again." And maybe you are still learning. Maybe the armor still calls to you, promising safety. Maybe the fear of being hurt still tugs at your chest. That's okay. Softness is not something you force. It is something you return to, again and again, even after you've forgotten. Every time you choose to breathe instead of control, to reveal instead of hide, to soften instead of harden, you return. And each return makes you more magnetic, more alive, more irresistible, because at the core of it, the feminine polarity is not about what you do. It is about who you allow yourself to be. And when you allow yourself to be real, when you dare to show your truth without apology, you become the kind of presence that others cannot forget. This is how struggle turns into seduction. Not because the pain vanishes, but because you finally let it live in the open. You let it shape you without defining you. You let it soften you without breaking you. You let it remind you, again and again, that your heart is not your burden, it is your gift. And here you are, listening, breathing, maybe even softening just a little. Maybe you feel the weight of the years you spent fighting for love that never gave back, or the ache of trying to be everything for everyone else while forgetting yourself. But in this very moment, something is shifting. You're realizing that all along you were never asking for too much, you were only asking for what your soul was designed to receive. Safety, connection, presence, love that doesn't demand you earn it. This is the secret of the feminine polarity. It does not chase love, it attracts it by embodying it. It doesn't push against the world, it lets the world lean closer. It doesn't confuse survival with intimacy. It understands that intimacy begins where the fight ends. And your struggles, the very ones that made you feel unworthy, are the same struggles that carved you into someone capable of this depth. They gave you eyes that can see through illusion. They gave you a heart that knows the difference between performance and truth. They gave you a soul that will no longer settle for crumbs. And yes, it can feel terrifying to live this way. To walk into relationships, into love, into life itself without the armor you once clung to. To stand open and say, "This is me," tender, longing, alive, unapologetic. There will be times you are misunderstood. There will be times people turn away. But the ones who stay, those who feel you in your fullness, will not just stay, they will cherish. Because you will have taught them that love is not found in perfection, but in presence. And perhaps the most powerful part of this transformation is that it doesn't just change how others respond to you, it changes how you respond to yourself. You stop punishing yourself for your scars. You stop shaming yourself for your tears. You stop silencing yourself in fear of rejection. Instead, you begin to honor every piece of you. You begin to look in the mirror and see not the broken, but the becoming. Not the too much, but the just right. Not the weak, but the profoundly strong. This is where the seduction truly takes root. Because when you love yourself in this way, when you treat your own softness as sacred, when you let your struggles be part of your beauty instead of stains on it, you create a presence that is undeniable. People feel safer around you. They feel seen. They feel invited into their own softness. And without meaning to, you become the flame that shows them it is safe to burn alive with feeling again. So let yourself be that flame. Let your pain become poetry. Let your longing become music. Let your presence become the gravity that pulls life toward you. This is not something you have to try for, it is what happens when you finally stop fighting yourself. And maybe tonight, as you lie down, you will place a hand on your heart and whisper, "I don't have to chase anymore. I don't have to prove anymore. I don't have to hide anymore. I am enough, exactly as I am." That is where struggle becomes seduction. That is where your story turns into power. That is where your heart becomes irresistible. And maybe now you understand what all the pain has been preparing you for. Not for the perfect relationship, not for the applause of others, not even for the safety of never being hurt again. It has been preparing you for this deeper knowing of yourself. The part of you that no longer hides, no longer bargains, no longer begs. The part of you that finally remembers. I was never meant to fight for love. I was meant to become it. You see, the feminine polarity is not about gender, it is about energy. It lives in men and women alike, in anyone willing to let go of control long enough to be touched by life. It is the willingness to soften instead of harden, to receive instead of grasp, to allow instead of demand. And when you live from that place, something extraordinary happens. The same struggles that once left you feeling powerless become the very source of your power. Heartbreak no longer makes you bitter, it makes you radiant. Disappointment no longer closes you, it deepens you. Longing no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like gravity. And every scar becomes a symbol of how much you dared to love, how much you dared to risk, how much you dared to feel. That is what makes you magnetic. Not your perfection, not your control, but your courage to remain open in a world that tried to shut you down. And this is the invitation: to live without the mask, to love without the bargaining, to breathe without the constant fight, to let yourself be fully alive. Because the truth is, no one remembers the one who never falters, who never feels, who never risks. We remember the ones who burn with life, the ones who tremble but keep going, the ones who cry and laugh with equal abandon, the ones who are so unapologetically real that we cannot help but be drawn to them. That is who you are when you stop hiding. That is who you are when you stop trying to be chosen and simply rest in your own enoughness. That is who you are when you let your struggles turn into seduction, when you let them remind you that every wound was carving you into someone unforgettable. So breathe, let it in. Let yourself remember that you don't have to run anymore. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to apologize for needing love, for wanting connection, for longing for something deeper. You were designed for it. And the moment you honor that truth, life begins to honor you back. If these words have touched you, let them stay with you. Carry them into your relationships, into your mornings, into the quiet moments where the old fears whisper again. And when they do, remind yourself, my softness is my strength. My longing is my compass. My truth is my crown. Thank you for sharing this space with me, for letting these words reach the places in you that perhaps no one has spoken to before. If this spoke to your heart, I invite you to stay connected here. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to join this journey, and let this space be a reminder of your radiance. Because you are not alone. You are not too much. You are exactly what you were always meant to be: magnetic, radiant, unforgettable.